settle in, turn down the lights, and if you'd like to hear more true horror every week, tap the like button and leave a comment. Now, let's begin. I've been working on a screenplay for the better part of a year, and I hit a wall of writer's block so hard I felt like I was losing my mind. I didn't want a hotel and I didn't want a busy campground. I wanted silence. I found this cabin on a niche rental site that catered to off-grid experiences. The photos looked perfect: exposed timber, a stone fireplace, and miles of dense pine forest in every direction. It was cheap too, probably because it was early November and the heating was limited to a wood stove and a few space heaters. I booked it for 4 nights, packed my laptop and a cooler full of food, and drove 4 hours north until the paved roads turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt. When I pulled up, the isolation hit me. The cabin was the only structure for miles. The silence was heavy, the kind that rings in your ears when you're used to the constant hum of traffic. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I fell into a rhythm. Wake up, make strong coffee on the propane stove, write until my brain hurt, and then read by the fire until I passed out. I didn't have cell service unless I walked about 100 yards up the driveway to a specific clearing, so I kept my phone off mostly. It was peaceful, but looking back, I think the isolation was already playing tricks on me by the second night. I started feeling like the woods were crowding in closer, like the trees were watching. I brushed it off as an overactive imagination. That's what I do for a living after all. I make things up. But on the third night, the reality turned out to be worse than anything I could have written. It was around 11 p.m. I had just finished a breakthrough scene and was feeling wired, so I decided to step out onto the back porch to get some fresh air before bed. The cold was biting, sharp enough to hurt my lungs, but it felt good. The moon was just a sliver, so the visibility was low, but my eyes had adjusted to the dark. I was leaning against the railing, looking out toward the tree line about 50 yards away, just zoning out. Then I saw movement. It wasn't the erratic darting of a deer or the lumbering shape of a bear. It was vertical. At first, my brain tried to tell me it was just a trick of the shadows, maybe a swaying branch. But then it moved again. It was a person. They were skirting the edge of the forest, staying just inside the tree line where the shadows were deepest. What terrified me wasn't just that someone was out there, which was bad enough given how far out I was, but the way they were moving. It was jerky and disjointed, like they were injured or drunk, but silent. They were tall, unnaturally thin, wearing dark clothing that hung off them in rags. I watched, frozen, as the figure stopped. They didn't turn to look at the cabin. They just stood perfectly still, blending into the trunk of a massive pine. If I hadn't seen them move, I would have never known they were there. I got this sick feeling in my stomach, a primal warning that I was being hunted. I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I backed into the cabin slowly, closed the door, and locked the heavy deadbolt. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the key twice. I went around the entire cabin checking every window. They were all locked, but the glass was old and single pane. If someone wanted to get in, a lock wouldn't stop them. I pulled all the curtains shut, doused the lights, and sat in the armchair by the dying fire. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, feeling ridiculous but terrified. I told myself it was probably a hunter or a hiker who got lost, but the way they moved, it didn't sit right. I sat there for hours, straining my ears against the silence. Eventually, the adrenaline crashed, and I must have dozed off in the chair. I woke up with a start. The room was pitch black, the fire had gone out completely. I was disoriented, heart hammering, trying to figure out what woke me. Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound. It was coming from the back door, the one I had just come in from hours ago. It wasn't a knock. It sounded like someone tapping a fingernail against the glass pane. I stopped breathing. I sat there in the dark, gripping the fire poker, praying it would stop. Silence followed. A heavy, suffocating silence that felt worse than the noise. I started to think maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe it was a branch. Then, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a soft creak of a floorboard. But it wasn't outside. It was inside. It came from the kitchen area, which was just around the corner from the living room where I was sitting. My mind raced. I had locked the door. I knew I had locked the door. But old locks can be picked, and old windows can be shimmied. Someone was in the cabin with me. I could hear the faint, wet sound of fabric brushing against the wall, followed by a shuffling footstep. They were moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to make noise. The shuffling sound was uneven. It matched the jerky movement I had seen in the woods. They were heading toward the living room. I knew if I stayed in the chair, I was cornered. I had to move. The front door was on the other side of the room, about 15 feet away. My car keys were in my pocket. I knew the layout of the room by heart after 3 days. I waited for the next shuffle sound to mask my movement. Drag. I stood up silently. I took a step toward the door. I was terrifyingly exposed. The intruder was just around the partition wall. I could smell them now. A rank, sour odor like wet dog and unwashed clothes. I lunged for the front door. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I hit the latch, threw the deadbolt, and yanked the door open. As the cold air hit my face, I heard a guttural, wet intake of breath from the darkness behind me, followed by a rapid, heavy thudding of footsteps rushing toward me. They weren't shuffling anymore. They were sprinting. I slammed the door behind me, not waiting to see if it latched, and sprinted for my car. The gravel tore up my feet. I realized I wasn't wearing shoes, just socks. But I didn't feel the pain. I fumbled for my key fob, hitting the unlock button as I reached the driver's side. I ripped the door open and threw myself inside just as something slammed against the rear window. It was a heavy, dull thud, like a fist or a body checking the glass. I jammed the keys into the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered for a second, the longest second of my life, before roaring to life. I threw it into reverse and floored it, tires spinning in the loose gravel. My headlight swept across the front of the cabin. Standing there, illuminated in the high beams for just a split second, was a man. He was incredibly tall, emaciated, his face gaunt and covered in patchy facial hair. He was wearing layers of filthy, oversized coats, but it was his expression that haunts me. He wasn't angry, he was smiling. A wide, toothless, vacant smile. He just stood there, watching me back down the driveway, his head cocked to the side at an unnatural angle. I drove down that mountain road like a maniac. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, and even then I kept checking my rearview mirror every 10 seconds. I drove straight to the nearest police station, which was a tiny sheriff's outpost 2 towns over. It was closed, so I had to call 911 from the parking lot. When the deputies finally went out to the cabin the next morning, they found the back door unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry. The lock hadn't been broken, just skillfully picked. Inside, they found muddy footprints leading from the kitchen to the living room armchair where I had been sleeping. But the scariest part wasn't what was inside. It was what they found in the crawl space underneath the cabin. They found a sleeping bag, a pile of food wrappers, and a small peephole that had been drilled up through the floorboards, looking directly into the bathroom. The deputy told me that judging by the amount of trash, someone had been living under there for weeks. I thought I was alone out there. I thought I was isolated, but the whole time I was riding, eating, and sleeping, he was right beneath me. He had listened to every move I made, waiting for the right moment to come upstairs. I haven't been back to the woods since. I don't think I ever will. And every time I hear a floorboard creak in my apartment, I freeze, waiting for that shuffling sound to follow. I booked the place out of pure desperation, mostly. I was on a solo road trip up the coast, and I'd totally underestimated how busy the holiday weekend was going to be. Every decent hotel within 50 miles was either booked solid or charging 3 times the normal rate. I finally found this listing on a third-party rental site around 6 p.m. It wasn't anything special. A converted guest house sitting behind a larger 2-story main property at the end of a cul-de-sac. The price was reasonable, which should have been my first red flag considering the demand in the area. But at the time, I just felt lucky. The photos were a bit grainy, showing a simple bedroom, a kitchenette, and a small fenced-in backyard. I messaged the host asking about parking, and they replied almost instantly with a pre-written block of text, giving me the code for the gate and the keypad on the door. No pleasantries, just logistics. I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep. I pulled into the gravel driveway just as the sun was going down. The main house was dark, shutters drawn, no porch lights on. It looked like no one had lived there for months, but I figured maybe the owners were away on vacation, which actually made me feel better since I didn't want to make small talk. The rental unit was around the back, detached from the main structure. It was small, basically a glorified shed that had been renovated. I punched in the code, heard the electronic lock beep, and stepped inside. The air was stale, like the windows hadn't been opened in a long time, but it was clean. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and spent the next 20 minutes trying to connect to the Wi-Fi, which was spotty at best. The first night was deceptively normal, but looking back, the silence was weird. It wasn't just quiet, it was dead. Usually, in a residential neighborhood, you hear distant traffic, dogs barking, or AC units humming. Here, it was like someone had hit the mute button on the world. I remember waking up around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water and freezing in the middle of the kitchen because I thought I heard breathing. I held my breath, listening, but realized it was just the refrigerator cycling on. It was paranoid, sure, but the isolation of the place was starting to get to me. I forced myself to go back to sleep, telling myself I was just tired from the drive. The weirdness really started the next morning. I slept in a bit, then decided to head out to a local bakery about 10 minutes down the road to grab coffee and breakfast. I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door. As I rounded the corner of the main house to get to my car, I stopped. There was a sedan parked halfway down the driveway, blocking my exit. It was an older model, gray and beat up, with the engine idling. I assumed it was the homeowner or maybe a cleaning crew for the main house, so I just walked toward it, expecting them to move. As I got closer, I saw a guy sitting in the driver's seat. He wasn't on his phone or looking at the house. He was just staring straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. I walked past the driver's side window and he didn't even blink. I honestly thought about knocking on the glass to ask him to move, but something about his posture, rigid, tense, made me hesitant. I squeezed past his car and got into mine. I had to drive over the grass a little bit to get around him. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror. He hadn't moved. I went to the bakery, ate a bagel, and scrolled through my phone, trying to shake off the creepy vibe. I was gone for maybe 30 minutes max. When I drove back, the gray sedan was still there, but now the driver's side door was wide open. The guy was standing next to the car, pacing back and forth on the gravel. He looked normal enough, maybe early 30s, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, but he looked completely wired. His hair was messy and he had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in a week. As soon as he saw my car pull in, he stopped pacing. I parked and got out, keeping my distance. He started walking toward me immediately. He wasn't running, but he was moving with a sense of urgency that set my internal alarms off. I took a step back toward my car door. "Are you staying here?" he asked. His voice was tight, breathless. He sounded like he had just finished running a marathon. I nodded slowly, clutching my keys. "Yeah, just for the weekend. Can I help you with something?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking past me toward the rental unit, then back at the main house. He was jittery, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "You can't stay another night," he said. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a plea. "Please. You need to leave today. Right now." I frowned, confused. "Excuse me? Are you the owner?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "No, I'm not the owner. I stayed here a few months ago. Look, I don't want to scare you, but you need to pack your stuff and go before it gets dark. Do not be here when the sun goes down." "Why?" I asked, my patience wearing thin but my anxiety spiking. "What happened?" He looked around again, his eyes darting to the windows of the main house. I don't want to get involved again. I just came back to see if... Look, I already called the hosting company. I told them. They don't care, they just keep renting it out." He took a step back toward his car, looking like he suddenly regretted talking to me. "Wait," I said. "If there's something wrong with the house, you need to tell me." He stopped at his car door and looked me dead in the eye. The look on his face was pure, unfiltered fear. "Just don't stay tonight, I'm serious." He got in, slammed the door, and reversed down the driveway so fast his tires kicked up gravel that hit my shins. He sped off down the street without looking back. I stood there in the driveway for a solid minute, my heart pounding. It was the middle of the day, the sun was shining, but I felt cold. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a disgruntled ex-tenant who got evicted. Maybe he was on drugs. Maybe he had the wrong house. I went back inside the rental and locked the door behind me. All 3 locks. I sat on the couch and debated what to do. I didn't want to lose the money I'd paid, and finding another place last minute would be a nightmare. But the guy's face kept popping into my head. He looked terrified. I decided to message the host. I didn't mention the guy's warning specifically because I didn't want to sound crazy. I just wrote, "Hi, just checking in. Everything is fine, but I noticed a car in the driveway earlier with a guy who said he used to stay here. Is there anyone else who has access to the property?" The host replied 10 minutes later. "Hi, no one should be on the property. The main house is vacant. Are you sure it wasn't a neighbor turning around? The property is very private." I wrote back, "He definitely wasn't turning around. He got out and spoke to me. He seemed upset." The host didn't reply to that. I saw the read receipt, but no typing bubble appeared. That silence bothered me more than the denial. I spent the rest of the afternoon inside. I couldn't relax. Every time a car drove past on the main road, I peeked through the blinds. The atmosphere in the house felt heavier, suffocating. By the time evening rolled around, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. I wasn't going to let some random weirdo chase me out of a rental I paid good money for. I made some dinner and turned on the TV, trying to drown out the silence. But the guy's voice kept replaying in my head. "Don't be here when the sun goes down." Around 10 p.m., I was watching a movie, but I had the volume low so I could still hear outside. The back of the rental unit had a solid door that opened into the small fenced yard I mentioned earlier. The fence was tall, wood privacy fencing so you couldn't see in or out. Suddenly I heard a sound. I froze. I muted the TV instantly. The house was dead silent. I sat on the couch staring at the kitchen where the back door was, waiting. A few seconds later it came again. I didn't move. I didn't call out, "Who's there?" because I knew whoever it was shouldn't be there. The gate to the backyard was padlocked from the outside. I had checked it when I arrived. To be at that door, someone had to have climbed the fence or had a key to the gate. I crept into the kitchen, staying low so my shadow wouldn't cast against the blinds. I reached the window next to the door and peered through the slat of the blinds. The yard light was on, a dim yellow bulb that barely illuminated anything. The yard looked empty. I couldn't see anyone standing directly in front of the door because of the angle, but there was nowhere to hide. I stood there for what felt like an hour, barely breathing. Then I heard the handle of the back door slowly turn. The metal mechanism creaked as it hit the deadbolt. They were trying to get in. That was it. I was done. I didn't scream. I didn't investigate. I grabbed my car keys and my wallet off the counter. I didn't even pack my bag. I left my clothes, my toiletries, everything. I ran out the front door, unlocked my car, and peeled out of the driveway. I didn't look at the main house. I didn't look at the backyard. I drove 30 minutes to the nearest well-lit town and booked a room at a chain hotel. I sat on the bed in the hotel room, shaking so hard I couldn't even type on my phone. The next morning, I woke up to a notification from the rental app. The host had canceled the remainder of my stay and issued a partial refund. The message just said, "Due to unforeseen circumstances, the unit is no longer available." No explanation. No question about why I left early. When I clicked on the listing to see if I could leave a review, the page was gone. "This listing has been removed." I was safe, but I couldn't let it go. A few days later, once I was back home, I started digging. I searched the address of the rental on Google. For the first few pages, it was just real estate listings and tax records. But then I found a cached version of a local news article from 2 years ago. The headline was about a missing woman, a traveler passing through the state. The police had traced her last known location to a private rental unit in that specific neighborhood. The article didn't give the exact address, but there was a photo of the search area. It was the driveway. I recognized the gravel, the overhanging oak tree, and the corner of the fence. The article said the woman was never found. The owner of the property was questioned but never charged due to lack of evidence, claiming the tenant had checked out early. The case went cold. I never saw the guy in the gray sedan again. I don't know if he was a previous victim who got away, or maybe someone who knew the missing woman. But I think about him all the time. I think about how desperate he looked. And I think about that soft tapping on the back door. Someone was waiting for me to open it. If I hadn't listened to that stranger, if I had just shrugged it off and gone to sleep, I don't think I would have ever checked out. I booked the place mainly because I was trying to save a few bucks on per diem for a work trip. I had a week of mandatory training at a satellite office about 15 minutes away, and the hotel prices in the area were absolutely ridiculous for some reason. I found this listing on Airbnb that looked decent enough. It was described as a cozy private annex attached to the back of a larger, older house in a quiet suburb. The photos showed a simple setup, a small kitchenette, a decent-sized bedroom, and a private entrance around the side. It wasn't luxury, but for the price and the location, it seemed like a steal. I requested to book, and the host accepted almost immediately. His profile seemed normal, though he wasn't very chatty. He just sent a generic message with the code for the lockbox and instructions on where to park. I didn't think much of it. I actually prefer hosts who leave you alone and don't try to force a conversation. I arrived late that Monday afternoon, exhausted from the drive. The neighborhood was one of those older, tree-lined places where the houses are set pretty far back from the street. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. I retrieved the key from the lockbox, let myself in, and did a quick walkthrough. The place was clean, but it had that distinct smell of old carpet and heavy cleaning products trying to mask something musty. I dropped my suitcase by the couch, unpacked my toiletries, and basically collapsed. I didn't notice anything weird right away. The first night was uneventful, mostly. I grabbed some takeout, watched a movie on my laptop, and went to bed around 10. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, but around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling watched. You know that primal instinct where your brain wakes you up before you even know why. I lay there in the dark, straining my ears. The room was dead silent. But then I felt it. A faint, cool current of air brushed across my face. It wasn't a gust, just a soft movement, like someone had gently opened a window nearby. I sat up, confused, and turned on the bedside lamp. The windows were all shut and locked tight. I checked the thermostat and it was set to 70 degrees and the vents weren't blowing. I stood in the middle of the room for a minute feeling stupid, telling myself it was just the house settling or a draft from the hallway. I eventually forced myself back to sleep, but I kept the bathroom light on. The next morning I was rushing to get ready for the training seminar. I was standing in front of the mirror tying my tie when I saw something in my peripheral vision. A loose receipt I had tossed on the dresser fluttered. It moved about an inch, then stopped. I froze. The AC wasn't on. There were no windows open. I walked over to the dresser and crouched down, trying to find the source of the air. It wasn't coming from under the front door. I followed the draft, holding my hand out like an idiot until I traced it to the wall right next to the closet. There was a spot where the molding didn't quite sit flush against the drywall. When I pressed my palm against it, I felt a steady, cold stream of air leaking out. It was weird, definitely, but I was running late. I told myself I'd check it out later, grabbed my bag, and left. The training that day was brutal, just hours of PowerPoints. So by the time I got back to the rental that evening, I was completely drained. I walked inside, and immediately the temperature felt off. It was colder inside the unit than it was outside. I went to the thermostat and bumped it up, but nothing kicked on. I sighed, figuring the HVAC was just on the fritz, and sat down on the couch to doom scroll on my phone for a bit. That's when I heard the noise. It came from the direction of the bedroom closet. It was a soft thud followed by a sliding sound. It wasn't the house settling. It sounded distinctly like something or someone shifting weight on a wooden floor. My stomach dropped. I sat there for a solid 30 seconds just listening, but silence had returned. I grabbed a heavy flashlight I kept in my car for emergencies and walked slowly toward the closet. My heart was hammering in my throat. I threw the closet door open, expecting to see a rat or maybe a raccoon that had gotten in. It was empty. Just a folding chair, an ironing board leaning against the wall, and a few wire hangers. I was about to close the door and laugh at myself when I noticed something in the upper corner, hidden behind the top shelf. It was a metal vent cover, but it looked totally different from the modern white ones in the rest of the room. This one was old, rusted, and painted over poorly, and the screws holding it in place were loose. I reached up and held my hand in front of it. That same cold draft was pouring out, much stronger here. Curiosity got the better of me. I dragged the folding chair over, climbed up, and used a quarter from my pocket to unscrew the fastener. It came off way too easily, like it had been removed recently. As soon as I pulled the cover away, a smell hit me right in the face. It was sour and stale, the smell of unwashed clothes and body odor confined in a small space. I shined my flashlight into the dark hole. It wasn't a duct. It opened up into a narrow, unfinished void behind the wall, almost like a crawl space that ran the length of the house. I leaned in closer, angling the light, and my blood ran cold. About 4 feet back, wedged between the insulation and the framing, was a sleeping bag. It was rolled out, messy, like someone had just crawled out of it. Next to it was a plastic Tupperware container with a red lid. I could see condensation on the inside of the plastic. There was a half-eaten sandwich inside, the bread not even stale yet. A water bottle lay on its side next to it. This wasn't old trash left by a contractor years ago. This was fresh. Someone was living in the walls. I scrambled down from the chair, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped the flashlight. The realization hit me instantly. The draft I felt the night before wasn't a draft. It was the air displacement from someone moving around behind the wall while I slept. I backed out of the bedroom, staring at the dark square of the open vent, half expecting a face to pop out. I grabbed my phone and messaged the host immediately. I tried to keep it calm because I didn't want to sound crazy if there was a logical explanation. I wrote, "Hey, I heard a noise in the closet and found a loose vent cover. It looks like there's a crawl space back there with some sleeping stuff and food in it. Did you have someone working on the house recently?" I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Nothing. I debated calling the police, but what would I say? I found a sandwich in a wall. I decided to pack my bag just in case. I was sitting at the kitchen table, keys in hand, when the host finally replied. The message was chillingly short. "That vent is not supposed to be accessed. Please do not touch anything else. I will come by tomorrow to secure it. Just don't touch it." It felt like a warning. I didn't feel safe staying in the bedroom, but I also didn't want to forfeit the money I'd spent if I was just overreacting. I decided to sleep on the couch in the living room with all the lights on and the TV playing on low volume. I locked the bedroom door from the outside. It was one of those flimsy privacy locks, but it was better than nothing. I didn't really sleep. I just laid there, staring at the bedroom door. Around 1 a.m., I heard it. A scraping sound. It was louder this time. It was coming from inside the bedroom. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The scraping stopped, and then the doorknob to the bedroom slowly turned. It jiggled, hitting the lock mechanism. Someone was in the bedroom. They had come out of the vent. I didn't wait to see if they could pick the lock. I didn't yell. I grabbed my jacket and my car keys, unlocked the front door as quietly as I could, and sprinted to my car. I peeled out of the driveway, not looking back until I was 3 streets away. I drove straight to a hotel near the airport, paid for a room, and double-locked the deadbolt. I sat on the edge of the bed for an hour just shaking, realizing how close I had been to whatever was in that wall. I reported the listing to Airbnb the next morning, sending them the photos I had taken of the crawl space and the sleeping bag. I told them everything. 2 days later, a safety team representative called me. They sounded serious but vague. They told me the listing had been suspended pending an investigation, but due to privacy policies, they couldn't tell me what they found or who the host actually was. I was furious. I called the local police non-emergency line to see if I could file a report, but they told me that since I hadn't actually seen a person and there was no sign of forced entry, there wasn't much they could do without the homeowner's cooperation. It was a dead end. A week later, I had to go back to the area to retrieve my suitcase, which I'd left in my panic. I arranged a time with the host through the app, dreading seeing him. When I pulled into the driveway, the front door to the unit was standing open. I walked in, and the place smelled overwhelmingly of fresh paint. The host was there, a tall, middle-aged guy who looked completely average. He didn't apologize. He just pointed to my bag by the door. I couldn't help myself. I walked past him into the bedroom. The closet was open. The vent was gone. The entire back wall of the closet had been patched with new drywall and painted over. You couldn't even tell where the hole had been. I turned to the host and asked, "What happened to the stuff in the wall?" He looked me dead in the eye, zero emotion, and said, "There isn't a crawl space there. It's just a utility chase. You must have been mistaken." He was gaslighting me to my face. I knew what I saw. I knew what I smelled. But standing there, alone with this guy in the empty house, I felt a wave of danger. I grabbed my suitcase and got the hell out of there. I still check the platform sometimes. The listing disappeared for a few months, but I found it again recently under a new title and a different host name. The photos are updated. New paint, new furniture. The reviews are all glowing, saying how quiet and peaceful it is. But every time I read them, I wonder if those guests know what's behind the drywall in the closet. I wonder if the person living in the walls left when I did, or if the host just did a better job of hiding them. I think about the half-eaten sandwich and the condensation in the container. Whoever was back there was listening to me sleep. They were inches away.